Hey there, folks. Zane from the Infinite Jukebox, aka the number one James Chance and the Contortions fan, with another album review. And today I wanted to talk about the new Gouge Away record, Deep Sage. After finding somewhat of a breakthrough within noisy underground music with their 2018 record, Burnt Sugar, Gouge Away continued to play until 2020, when the pandemic hit and the band decided to take a break, an extended hiatus, if you will, as the members went on to work in several other projects for the time being. But because of the radio silence that came from them, many people assumed that the group and their Pixies-inspired name were done for good, with a silent breakup that is honestly all too common for a lot of underground bands who don't necessarily have enough clout to maybe warrant a public statement. And obviously those rumors aren't true, because if they were, I wouldn't be talking about this album of new material from them. The group returned basically out of the blue when they broke their silence and started making their comeback in mid 2023, and they re-stepped into the spotlight in the most immediate, notable way possible by announcing a new album in January of this year, 2024, and that album is none other than this record, Deep Sage, which sees them return with a degree of force that we've never seen before, while also seeing them continue the momentum that they were building up before they decided to take an extended break. It's really nice to see them back, but it's especially nice to see them in this form. I mean, what can I say? They've been steadily building a fan base for years now. Again, it's their first studio album in 6 entire years, and this is the triumphant comeback that also acts as some of the best material that they've ever put to tape. Deep Sage feels like Gouge Away at their most perfected and fine-tuned that we've seen up to this point, and while that could be an insult for any sort of punk band trying to be a bit more on the DIY side, which Gouge Away still are here, I don't mean that in a bad way whatsoever. This record right here manages to perfectly balance a lot of the very garagey, hardcore tendencies that Gouge Away have been known to consistently dabble in for years at this point, while at the same time managing to highlight a lot of the really excellent song structures and melodies that make them stand out from the crowd of other more DIY-oriented punk and rock bands out there. There are countless tracks here with great choruses, really intense bridges, and nice build-ups in those moments that allow a lot of the explosions of sound that happen during those choruses to really have a maximum effect overall. And a lot of the moments here almost feel like homages to a lot of classic alternative rock bands, perhaps most notably the band that inspired Gouge Away's name, the Pixies, with the soft, loud dynamics that they often participate in here. But none of it ever feels derivative or anything like that. I just mean to say that this record, while not totally unfamiliar to people who know the history of alternative music, is definitely a really excellently executed perfection, or at least as perfect as Gouge Away can be at the moment, of that particular style. I really like the soft, loud kind of quality about this record in particular a lot, because I think Gouge Away do it in a manner where the softer, more delicate moments, a lot of the verses don't feel soft for the sake of not having it be loud all the time. I think that they're soft for the sake of building up pressure, building up intensity, so that those louder moments do have, again, maximum effect. They have more impact on the listener. There are a lot of tracks here with more dialed back verses that manage to still have a certain intensity to them that ensures the record never loses any steam, but at the same time they play a key role in making sure that every single song and the way that it is structured on this record makes sense and manages to be consistently interesting while at the same time never too predictable. For example, you have the verses on the track Newtow, for example, where you have these really grinding verses that feel very noise rock adjacent, or even at times directly go into the realm of noise rock, and ensure that the entire record has this very striking sort of appeal to it, even in the moments where things are a bit more slowed down, even where things are a bit more restrained in comparison to a lot of the outright hardcore moments that are presented here in a variety of other passages. And it's because of that I think this entire record is successful, and that no matter what track you choose, no matter what part of what track you choose that you end up going to, you're going to find a bit of passion or a bit of energy at the very least, if not going to a chorus where you find a huge amount of raw, unfiltered energy. A pretty brief runtime of just under 35 minutes too also ensures that the band doesn't necessarily overstay their welcome, but they still have enough time to develop all of their ideas on this record, execute things in the way that they actually want to, rather than being confined to just a handful of minute or two long tracks. And I think it was a great idea for them to go with actual substance over style. There are a lot of bands out there, specifically within the realm of punk, that will do a couple of minutes per track and feel like they maybe kind of underbake things a little bit, but that's not the case with Gouge Away whatsoever. They recognize that to truly achieve what they want to do, there are often times where they will need to extend a song to a few minutes long, maybe even 5 minutes long, depending on the track. And I think it's great that they are self-aware about that because it, again, allows them to fully flesh out every single idea that they have on the record. So yeah, as a whole, Deep Sage, in the context of the Gouge Away discography specifically, feels like some of the most well-structured material they've ever put out, some of the most well-executed material they've ever put out, just some of the best material that they've ever put out from a structural standpoint, and it just so happens that there's a huge amount of love going into that material at the same time. Frontwoman Christina Michelle is at the top of her game here in particular, especially. I mean, Deep Sage sees her deliver some of the most unrelenting vocal performances that she has ever put down for this band, and at the same time, she gets the chance to demonstrate the dynamics of her vocals, proving that she is more than capable of delivering a variety of vocal styles for the sake of different tracks throughout the same project. I think a big benefit that this record has, a big one-up over other Gouge Away records, is that her vocals seem to be a bit higher in the mix, a bit cleaner in the production here, compared to their past records, even Burnt Sugar, which is arguably their most popular release up to this point, and I think it's for the better, if I'm being completely honest. While some people will probably miss the sort of garagey DIY quality of hearing her voice somewhat buried under distorted guitar and the like, I think that here on Deep Sage, it's for the best that she sounds a bit clearer because you really get to hear the kind of personality and charisma that she has behind the mic, which, in my opinion at least, was slightly lost on some of their past releases. Tracks like No Release see her be painted as this sort of animalistic performer with the scratchiness in her voice, in her vocals during her screams, and more violent vocal tendencies, really adding to the raw energy that you get throughout a lot of this record, adding to songs that are already intensely emotional in the first place, instrumentally and lyrically. And throughout various other points on the record, there are also moments where she manages to very well pull off a more restrained vocal style that suits some of the softer moments, some of the slower moments, some of the more even atmospheric moments, much better than she maybe could have on past records. And that's not to dismiss her performance work on other Gouge Away albums, it's just me saying that I feel like this album is a huge step up for her as a performer and some of the best work that she's ever delivered. Now, the melodic talk singing that she does bring to the table in a number of passages throughout this album isn't necessarily something that's going to be unfamiliar for Gouge Away listeners. Again, like I said, it's not like she hasn't been able to deliver a variety of vocals in the past. I just mean to say that, again, she really does so with a lot of personality here, with a lot of flair here, but still remaining grounded and not necessarily trying to outdo her own band, and I think as a whole she really kills it. This is especially shown on the album closing track, Dallas, which almost sounds not very Gouge Away-like, but I mean that in a good way. She delivers these kind of dreamy vocals, almost dream pop adjacent vocals that I feel are very mesmerizing in the context of the track, which already has a fantastic instrumental. And yeah, as a whole, I don't think that you could really ask for much more from her here. Her songwriting also manages to shine here too, another byproduct of her vocals being a little more prominent on this record and a bit clearer on this record. Tracks like Overwatering, for example, are written in a beautifully painful way, with that track in particular being a pretty biting journey into self-awareness, realizing that relationships with close people are failing not because of their faults, but because of one's own lack of understanding of boundaries. A rough topic to be sure, but a fairly relatable one at that, and it's a song that I think is ultimately one of the more striking songs on the record from a lyrical standpoint, and that's saying something considering pretty much every track here, at the very least, feels intriguing and deep to some extent from a songwriting perspective. Even the tracks that ultimately don't really mean anything in particular still feel like they have some degree of impact from the band to the listener, and because of that, I can't really fault it, even if some of the lines here are maybe a bit cryptic. The rest of Gouge Away are largely in peak form throughout the entirety of Deep Sage as well, so I think it's important to note that the rest of the band here sound excellent. It's not just their front woman. The guitar work here ranges from mesmerizingly repetitious to longingly fuzzy in this nearly nostalgic but still too violent to be truly emotional in a sort of melancholic way kind of tone. I think it's still an emotional record as far as guitar work goes. It just becomes this more aggressive side of melancholy almost at times, and I think it's interesting how it embraces that in a way that I don't necessarily think is obvious upon first listen or maybe even intended, but I do feel like there are some bittersweet notes coming from guitarist Mick Ford and his tone here that ultimately makes for a pretty unique record in that regard. You also have Tommy Cantwell's production. His drum work on this record is pretty essential in adding this sort of punch to the album, this very deep kind of tone that you get in a lot of the percussion throughout the record that definitely affects how the listener is able to perceive a lot of the instrumentals here, again giving everything just a slightly more striking quality overall, and for that I can say that he's fairly underappreciated as far as roles in the band go. And lastly, the final member of the four-piece, Tyler Forsyth's bass work is pretty phenomenal here for the most part, having this kind of grunge-like crunch to them on tracks like the comeback single that they had, Idealized, that ultimately gives, again, as I stated earlier in the review, this sort of grinding feel that I think adds this sort of darkness, this roughness, this edge to the album that definitely keeps the entire record going in terms of pure raw energy, in terms of atmosphere, in terms of desire and hunger from the band itself. In the slower moments of the record, there's always the crunch of that bass and the amazing vocal work and vocal performances going on here, keeping things feeling lively even when the percussion may be a bit too simplistic for you to latch onto, or the guitar work may be taking a step back for a brief passage or so. As a whole, the performances that are delivered throughout Deep Sage do much more than just prove, hey, Gouge Away is back. Rather, I think that this is actually some of the best performance work that any of them have ever delivered, at the very least with this band in specific, because the vocals here are taken to another level. The guitar work here is somewhat confusing in terms of the way it's presented, and I mean that in a good way, because there are times where it feels violent and aggressive, and other times where it feels maybe a bit more melancholic in a very late 80s, early 90s alt-rock kind of way. The drumming here is precise, the bass work here is pretty easy to gravitate towards in terms of the heaviness it adds to the record, etc., etc. My point is, I feel like this is Gouge Away as a band going to the next level from an instrumental standpoint, being a little more polished up in terms of production, and at the same time never losing any of the garage-like qualities and garage band qualities that really sold them to most people in the first place years ago. Deep Sage may not be a record that reinvents punk as a whole or anything like that, but it doesn't really need to be, because this is an album that really just shows to people that they are able to evolve their sound to an extent that feels fresh. It keeps things feeling original and new, while at the same time never losing any of the edge that makes them such an exciting and, at this point, consistent band in the first place. They may have taken a brief hiatus, as you could probably tell, though, by the positivity that I've given throughout this review. It was well worth the wait anyway. Honestly, it wasn't even that long of a wait. It was a very brief hiatus as far as hiatuses go. But I digress. Everything from Christina Michelle's vocals here to the rest of the band's impassioned performances, it all sounds phenomenal. And as a whole, I would say that Deep Sage proves that they can continue evolving their sound while still taking notes from some great influences like the Pixies and Fugazi, and still never manage to feel derivative in any way. They still feel original. And because of that, mixed with the, again, just extremely visceral passion that's found in the best corners of this album, I think it's pretty safe to say that this is, so far, at least, one of the best punk albums of 2024. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. I've been Zay from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.